everyone, this is Marika and welcome back to another session of Guidance and Counseling. In our previous sessions, we have discussed what is guidance and what is counseling. We've also seen the principal needs, scope of guidance and counseling. We've also discussed about the basic components in counseling process and the organization of counseling process. We've also discussed the phases of counseling process. Today, we are going to discuss about the tools of counseling process. As said earlier, in the definition itself, guidance process uses various tools in order to collect data from the counselee. So today we will discuss what are the different types of tools used in the process of counseling. During the service of counseling, a counselor uses various types of tools in order to collect information from the counselee. Majorly, two types of tools that are used by a counselor to collect information. The two types are non-testing tools and psychological test. This too is the broad classification of the tools used in the process of counseling to collect information or to gather information from a counselee. Now, what are non-testing tools? What comes under non-testing tools? These non-testing tools are usually developed by the counselor and are used for individual assessment according to the need and problem of the individual. The counselor usually develops a tool for the particular individual. Those tools comes under non-testing tools. Let us see what are the non-testing tools used in the process of counseling. The first one is interview. Interviews are the basic tools for collecting information in the process of counseling. We know what is interview. An interview is defined as an interaction between a counselee and a counselor with a definite objective on mind. Interview is a process, it is an interactive process where there are questions asked and the asked questions are answered. It is an interactive process that takes place between two, that is a counselor and a counselee. Why are they interacting? Why is the process of interview taking place? There is a basic information to be gathered. With a definite purpose on mind, the counselor and the counselee communicate with one another. There is an interaction process that takes place that can be defined as an interview in the counseling process. Now, how is interview a tool in counseling? Interview will help the counselor achieve the desired information. Whatever information is required for the counselor in order to help the counselee, all those information are gathered by the counselor from the counselee and the family members of the counselee. Other significant people such as friend or loved ones of counselee can also be a part of interview process. So this interview process involves counselee, significant people in his or her life, his family members and his friends as well. So there is an interactive process which helps the counselor to have or to get the desired information about the counselee. When I say interview is flexible tool and it helps the counselor to customize the interaction. So as I said earlier, non-testing tools, it is prepared by counselors. Interviews are prepared by the counselor according to the need of the client, and if the client has to customize the interview, if there are any kind of changes that the counselor wants to bring to the process of interview, it can be done by the counselor. For different individuals, there are different questions that is to be asked. So it can be customized by the counselor. Next non-testing tool is observation. What is observation? Observation is a process where the counselor watches over the counselee and monitors the counselee. Observation includes watching carefully, observing the counselee. Observation can be of two different types. The first one is called overt and the second one is called covert. What is overt observation and what is covert observation? Overt observation is the counselee knows that the counselor is observing them. So when the counselor is aware that they are being observed, it is called as overt observation. Whereas covert observation is when the counselee is unaware that the counselor is observing them. Observation is a very useful tool in the process of counseling. In some situation, when collecting data or collecting information from the counselee is not possible, if the collection of data is not possible from the counselee directly, through observation, the counselor can gather a lot of information about the counselee. Also, when the other tools in the method of counseling cannot be used, observation can be used by the counselor. Next one we have anecdotal report. So what is an anecdotal report? Anecdotal report is a report made out of observation over a period of time and is something that is written as a summarized version of the incident or of what has happened. Anecdotal report also can be used as a tool for the process of counseling. Anecdotal report, it consists the report or the recording of an important incident that has happened. So anecdotal report gives you a lot of information about a particular incident that has happened in counselor's life and is of importance to counselee. The fourth one is cumulative record. Now, cumulative record is a record that provides meaningful, significant, and comprehensive information about an individual over years. Especially the cumulative records that are maintained in educational institute consist not only the attendance of the students, also the social behavior of the student, the adjustment of the student in the school, the behavior of the individual with other students, and as well as the teachers in the school, and various other aspects that can be measured during the school period. So it not only consists of the attendance report of the student, but various other aspects of a student during the student period. Cumulative record also can be used as a tool in the process of providing counseling. Cumulative record also sometimes have the record of attribute of an student, like how hardworking the student is or the tolerance of the student. It also consists of certain attributes of an individual. Next, we have checklist. What is a checklist? A checklist in general is used to identify if there's presence or absence of certain thing or certain attribute. So checklist also can be used as a tool in the process of counseling. Measure any attribute of an individual. Checklist can be a useful tool. Next, we have rating scales. A rating scale is a scale that helps us to understand a degree or extent of certain things. For example, rating pain rating scale helps us to understand the level of pain, the degree or extent of pain. In counseling process, rating scale can be used to assess certain attribute of an individual such as truthfulness, honesty, and their cooperation. Next, we have autobiography and diaries. Autobiography and diary are also important tool in understanding one individual. It is obviously useful in the process of counseling. Autobiography or a diary consists a lot of information about the emotion of an individual. These can be used as a tool during the process of counseling. So these are the 7 different non-testing tools used in the process of counseling. We have interview, observation, anecdotal records, cumulative records, checklist, rating scale, and autobiography and diary. Let us now see the various psychological tests. Psychological test provides information about the psychological characteristics of an individual, such as their aptitude, their ability, their interest, their intelligence, and their personality. There are different personality tests that can be used in the process of counseling. Let us see what are the different purposes of psychological test in the process of counseling. When we use the psychological test, especially in educational institute, it will help us to understand or differentiate between the poor students and bright students. As I've said earlier, the students in a classroom have different range of understanding, different level of interest. It is always not necessary that every student in a class has the same intellectual level. Psychological test will help us to identify brighter and poor student from the class. Now, why is it necessary for us to understand bright student, to differentiate bright and poor students? So that remedial classes can be arranged for the students who are poor in studies. Next, we have to identify the areas of weakness. So if there's any kind of weakness in an individual, to identify that, psychological test will help us. Next one, to serve as a vocational guidance, to serve as a basis of vocational guidance. Next one is to predict the potentials of an individual. We are able to understand through psychological tests bright students and poor students. Similarly, it will help us to understand the potential of an individual. These are the different purposes for the psychological test to be conducted for the process of counseling. There are different types of psychological tests that is conducted during the process of counseling. So the first one is personality test. The second one is aptitude test. The third one is achievement test. And the last one is inventory test. Let us discuss one by one what are these psychological tests. So the first one is personality test. So from the term itself, you can understand why this psychological test is done. Personality test is done to assess the personality of an individual. Example of a psychological test is Rorschach test. The next type of psychological test is aptitude test. So aptitude test is usually done to assess the extent to which an individual would profit from a certain specific course or a training. There are two types of aptitude test. One is called a specialized aptitude test and another one is called generalized aptitude test. The third one we have is achievement test. So again, from the term itself, we can understand what is this test. Achievement test is usually done in order to assess the academic performance of an individual. Few examples of achievement test are cooperation test, English reading test, and test of educational development. And the last type of psychological test is inventory test. Inventory test is usually used to assess the study habit in students. It is usually used to understand, to assess the habit of studying in students. These are the different psychological tests used in the process of counseling. The main responsibility of the counselor is that the counselor interprets those test results continuously. It is not that the counselor has to focus on the score, has to interpret what actually the test that has been conducted are showing, what kind of information they are pointing at. So as a counselor, we have to continuously interpret the psychological test or any kind of test that has been conducted. To conclude, today we have discussed about the tools that is used in the process of counseling. So there are two different types of tools. The first one is called as non-testing tools and the second one is called as psychological test. The non-testing tools includes various tools that are prepared by the counselor and it is customizable. It depends on the need and also the problem of the counselee the counselor is currently dealing with. It can be changed. So there are different types of non-testing tools which includes interview, observation, anecdotal reports, cumulative records, checklist, rating scale, and autobiography and diary. In the psychological test, we've seen these kind of tests are conducted in order to understand a particular attribute of an individual. It is usually used to assess intelligence, interest, aptitude, and personality of an individual. There are different types of psychological tests, which includes aptitude test, achievement test, personality test, and the inventory test. I hope the class was helpful. I'll see you all in the next session where we will be discussing about role and preparation of a counselor. Thank you and see you all in next session.